Right. Good morning. Is my microphone working?
Yep.
Yes? Good. We've been trying to get you to one of these events for a while, so thanks for making it out.
It's great to be here.
The story I read about kind of the foundation myth of Atlassian is that when you founded the company, you never wanted to wear suits, and you wanted to make more than 48,000 Australian dollars. I assume the money worked out. What about the suit? Never a suit?
Never have to wear a suit. Yeah.
Not for the Queen, nobody? No.
I mean, weddings, funerals, that type of thing. But ties are off limits completely.
Sure.
So.
But I think that speaks to kind of the philosophy at Atlassian too, especially in those early days, right? Because when I think of suits in the enterprise, I think of salespeople. You never had a sales force.
Yeah. So I think Atlassian started almost 19 years ago now, and at the time, software was sold either, if you're too young, you won't remember this, but in a shrink wrap box in a Best Buy store, or it was sold on the golf course. That was kind of the two ways software got sold. And if you wanted to sell to businesses, you were selling on the golf course. And largely it was Fortune 500 companies that consumed software. They could afford the transaction costs. And if you're going to sell on a golf course, it's got to cost 6 or 7 figures to do that. And we felt that with the advent of the internet, that would change. Partially, I think, because we had bought shareware games through the internet as teenagers and felt like, well, of course, we can buy software that way. And so we pioneered, I guess, selling software online. And I think that some of the things we did well in the early days that are probably still applicable now in different ways was that we used open source software to build things fast. So we competed with other companies that had spent 20 years building something that we could replicate or get to that same level in a year or two. We were one of the first people to use Google AdWords in terms of acquiring customers. And I remember we would spend 10 cents a click on things that are now $10 or $20 a click. And I only wish I had a bit of marketing budget back then. It seemed like a lot of money to spend $200 in a week on Google Words. And so we did
more
that.
These days.
Yeah, you spend more of that in an hour on Google. And we sold online, and we had very much a self-service model because we wanted to sell globally, and we knew that firstly, Mike and I didn't know what sales was, so we couldn't do it if we'd been asked.
What was your background, just for the audience?
So I did an engineering degree, sort of half business, half engineering degree, and both Mike and I dropped out through our university to start our company, so didn't really, like the most entrepreneurial thing I'd done before that was sell effectively cookies for the scouting organization, right? Like that's the closest I got to selling anything. And anyway, so we built a product and sold it globally, and we realized if we were going to sell globally, we couldn't have a salesperson that call it to various times, so it had to sell itself on the internet. If it had to sell itself on the internet, it had to be easy to use, and so we pioneered really ease of use of getting started, and so forth all the way through our business model.
How much of that early choice was choice and how much was necessity?
When I look at some people who feel like, you look at them and they've got a 20-year business plan on how it's all going to work out, and I'm in admiration of those people. I think in the early days we were 21-year-old students out, who really didn't want to get a real job, and so a lot of the things were sort of hunches in early days that worked out well, and we've. One of those was, early on, I think of pivotal moments in Atlassian. One of them was we created importers for competitive products. If you think about it, moving from one software product to another, used to involve consultants, and you might get, a big consulting firm to come in, and it would take 6 months to do. And we built a one-button importer from one of our competing products. And I think that was a huge inflection point for us because someone could go from almost black and white, this other product, to Technicolor, in Atlassian, in a couple of hours by just pressing a button. And that was very unusual.
Sure. And in those early days, I'm guessing there was a lot of shadow IT happening, teams buying your products without necessarily the blessing of a CTO or CIO.
Yeah, I think that's happening more and more. There's the sort of bring your own device, but there's bring your own software now that people talk about. But Atlassian was built on that, in that we would have very large banks, and we'd one day get a call from the CIO of that bank who says, "Look, I really need to have a chat with you. We need to have a conversation. It turns out you're like a huge vendor to us, and we use your stuff everywhere." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. What do you want to chat about?" I don't know. I just feel like I should call you and have a chat because you're a huge vendor, and we didn't really have anything to discuss. And it turns out, selling to teams, in an enterprise, if you're selling at the right price point, they could swipe a credit card, which up until the last 15 or 20 years never happened because software was so expensive, it had to go on budgets and so forth. And we're seeing this now with everything from Slack to Zoom and other companies where they just get into an individual team and go up from there. And it sounds simple, but there's a few things that we've learned. If you want to, there's people in the audience doing their own startups in the enterprise space. If you want to go that way, you've got to think about it in a certain fashion. And we found if you're going to go into a certain team, you've got to coexist with your competitors. If you're Workday never has to work with Microsoft, HR or Oracle's version. Like you have one of them at a time. But if you're going to go in at a team level, you are going to be with competing products, and you have to have integrations with products that you might compete with or might even want to displace one day. And so that was really important. You have to have a product that's useful for a team. There's some products that are only useful for an entire organization because they require a whole organization's data or that number of people to do it. It has to be at a price point that people can swipe their credit card and get going. Even if later on there might be other versions that they pay more for, they have to be able to get going at a team level. And I guess we figured that out by accident, 20 years ago. I think those things are still true today.
Sure. Have you had to play golf with anybody yet to make a sale?
No, I'm terrible at golf.
All right.
Yeah. It does seem like golf courses are on the decline these days, and I can't help but think that may be something to do with how enterprise software is sold.
Same is probably true for, maybe same is true for steakhouses. What was that first big enterprise sale you made, and how did that come about? Was it just one of these just coincidental team signing up sales? Or?
Yeah, the first sale that really stands out for me was we sold to a company called American Airlines that you would all know, and we didn't really know them coming from Australia, and they sent us a fax with a credit card number written down, and we'd never heard from them before, or they hadn't called us up or anything like that, and that was our first sale. And these days we sell to companies, 150,000 companies around the world, and they buy online and transact online. I was thinking we're chatting backstage. I don't know too many founders in the audience these days are waiting for the fax machine to deliver money like we did at that time.
Do you still have a fax machine?
No, we probably still have an eFax account somewhere lying around we haven't cancelled. But sort of when the great thing about software is if it works, it's got zero transactional costs.
Sure.
So someone swipes a credit card and you hand over license keys, or in the SaaS world you spin up an instance. But effectively it's zero marginal cost.
Sure. Now that you have 150,000 customers, there must be those who want more service from you, who want more of a white glove service from you. What are you doing for them?
Yeah, so it's interesting, we sell to companies from 5, people use our products with, anywhere from 1, but 5 people will be a team to 50,000 people. And, historically, we've been pretty famous for not having a sales force. And people say, well, that's great, just don't have a sales force, but how do you sell things? And we spend all the effort to make our products self-serve and so forth. And it's evolved over time. So we now have salespeople in various parts of the business doing roles. But people are, what's my bright line? Why are we different to other companies? And what I've found is that, I'll give you an example. We will experiment with people and sales, but when we have to scale it up, we are very thoughtful about how we do that. And an example, our very first salesperson was actually, we call them loyalty advocates now, but their job was to make sure our customers renewed their software. It was our sort of a semi-subscription model. You get services and support if you pay us every year. And when we hired 3 people to do that first job, we hired 2 people sitting in downtown San Francisco, and we hired effectively a robot as our 3rd person. And,
is it a person or a robot?
It was like an email robot. Effectively, we said, well, we had a control group. Mm-hmm. And, I don't think the salespeople were too happy to have a control group, because they're racing no one. That was interesting to chat through our president at the time and convince him that that's what we wanted to do. And we found that having, salespeople was good, but it wasn't anywhere near as good as we thought it was because the control group did pretty well. And even today, for that group of people that we chase renewals on, we'll send them an email, 90, 60, 30 days before and all the way through their renewal time but we don't actually pick up the phone and call them until 30 days after renewal. And every year we experiment with that. We'll take a cohort and we'll call them 30 days earlier or 90 days earlier, or we'll do different things with them. And we found that if I bring it 30 days before the renewal's due, I have to call 5 times as many people, and I make a marginally improvement on my conversion rate. And so I think at Atlassian we've just always taken a very experimental approach. We don't know what the right answer is. And I compare that with some of our enterprise peers where they would say, let's have salespeople who will go call our enterprise customers, like our best cohort, let's go target them. And they find, well and behold, that, wow, there's a short-term bump in revenue as a result. And then they, well, we should do our mid-market people. And then, before too long, within a year or two, they now got salespeople touching every part of their cycle. Even if that wasn't necessarily the most optimal thing, it's just the most expedient way to get revenue. And if you are, in the public markets and you have to get revenue this quarter, or you're venture capital backed and you've got to show results in the very, very short term, throwing salespeople will always get you short-term results.
Sure.
We're lucky enough that took 10 years to go public, so we had a lot more sort of flexibility to kind of prove out the revenue model. And even today, we experiment with sales.
Sure. And you have some announcements today that kind of fit in there as well. Maybe you can tell us about those for a second. Yeah,
so one of the things that we have done well over the years is, from small to very large companies. And we've had most of our, sales historically when we started were behind the firewall. People would buy our software and they would install it on their own servers. And even today, we find that our largest companies were historically kind of using that server-based products, and we scaled them up, and we've got a data center version and that scales for tens of thousands of users. And we found that most of our small customers, our startups and so forth, they were all using our cloud-based products. And what we found, in the last couple of years, is that even the biggest of big companies are turning up and saying, we now want to be across in the cloud. And it doesn't make sense for us now to, buy hardware, put it in our own chilled data center, and then maintain all that. We want you to do all that for us.
That seems to be on the way out.
Yeah, it definitely seems that the SaaS and cloud world is kind of the way of the future. And I'm talking about the biggest of big companies, regulated industries, people that you wouldn't have thought would be interested are totally turning the corner now. And so we've made a lot of improvements to our cloud offerings. A year ago, we introduced a thing called Access, which allowed us to, for users to manage, or companies to manage their users. Because you imagine with a team-based software, if someone's using Trello across their entire organization, as an organization, you want to make sure that when someone leaves the company that we lock the data down and a whole bunch of security around that. So we introduced a product a year ago. And today we're announcing 2 pricing changes. And I think it's important because this audience, pricing and packaging, once you've got your product market fit, how you price and how you do that and do it disruptively is really important. And we've always wanted to be really affordable at the low end, so every single company in the world can afford our products. And we've also wanted to make sure we scale at the high end, but we haven't really done that well in cloud to date. So today we're announcing, right here, I think there's people at the office pressing the buttons to go live. We have announcing free versions of Jira and Confluence to join free versions of the other products we have.
Which means pretty much all your products now have a free version.
Almost, yeah, I think almost all of our products now have a free version to get started. And that's really important because we know that many of you in the audience, if you're doing a startup, that you may want to use Atlassian's products because you know that you can use, there's a lot of products when you're a 5-person team, but when you get to 15 and 20 people, Atlassian helps you scale, and it's better to get started at 5 people than it is to try and go through changing all that out. So now we have free versions for every startup of all our products. And the other thing we're announcing today are premium versions of all of our cloud products. So that means now for larger enterprises who want to move, from running stuff themselves to the cloud, they get, premium involves high levels of SLAs, storage, high levels of support, as well as things like data locality and a lot of other things that bigger companies are after. So we're really proud to announce those here, and we think that changing the pricing and allowing kind of all companies to be in the cloud is really important.
For sure. You can read about it on TechCrunch. Why did it take you so long to get to this point? Because I assume a lot of enterprises wanted these kinds of SLAs. They wanted these extra services.
So it's interesting that as a company, we've always been pretty disruptive on pricing. One of the things, I mentioned importers from competitive being one of the inflection points. One of the other inflection points was when we released $10 starter licenses of our products. And to put it in context, we used to have years ago, we used to have three versions of our products. One would be $1,200, one would be $2,400, and $4,800. And those numbers were picked purely out of the air, and because my co-founder read a textbook that said you should have three versions of your product, and we kind of roughly made it up from there.
Worked out all right.
Yeah, and these days there's a whole bunch of pricing professionals out there that you can read that'll tell you the same thing. But we took our $1,200 product and released it for $10, and because we felt that there's a whole bunch of people out there that wanted to, in countries around the world that couldn't afford that. And again, if I look at that, it cost us about 5 to 10% of our revenue years ago, and that was this huge inflection point. And on the cloud, it's harder to do that because there's real costs of running software in the cloud. And in the last year, we've made huge investments in reducing those costs now so that we've got to a point where we can offer free versions of our products in the cloud.
Another, outside of these announcements, but about 2 years ago you announced Stride. It's one of the latest full products you announced probably, that was completely new. And you shut it down, well, you sold it off to Slack within about 1.5 years, 2 years. What happened there?
Yes, I mean, you come to these conferences to learn, other people's mistakes or lessons, and that's what you'll hear. So we acquired a product called HipChat years ago, and it was great, great product. It was growing really fast. HipChat was tripling year on year, and we were like, wow, this is fantastic. Everything else is doubling year on year or growing 50%. This is tripling. We're doing great. And it turns out the market was way larger than even that. We should have been growing 10 times year on year. And we eventually, had to sort of concede that market to Slack, who had done a good job at kind of making their space play in the market. So
did you just miss that way for?
So I'll tell you the mistakes that when you make mistakes, you sort of like, kiddies, sit down and let me tell you what Grandpa made mistakes, so you don't do the same ones. As startup founders, what we found is that when you grow from 3 people, which is the company we acquired, the number of people it takes to do something doesn't go 3, 4, 5, 6. It goes 3, 4, 5, 30. Because a team of 3 operates in a certain manner, and a team of 10 needs to actually change all the practices and the way they work and so forth. That meant that we really needed to go to 30 people as opposed to the incremental investment, and so that's a lesson we've learned. And with other acquisitions we've done, now we put a lot more people on them day one. I think the other one is that in a market that is great and nascent and so forth, even a product that is growing ridiculously fast and has great, customer feedback is, may not be gaining market share vis-a-vis competitors. And so that's something that, if we were back now, we probably would have put way more, investment behind that product. And we rebuilt the product called Stride, and actually helped out build out Atlassian platform. So we now have an amazing platform for all of our products that run on, like things like identity and other things. In fact, as an aside, as a founder, you've got to make a choice sometimes. Do you want to be a one product company, or do you want to be a multiple product company? And at some stage you need to make that decision, and it really affects everything you do. If you're a one product company, you have a head of product management that manages that product. If you're a multi-product company, you have a head of product management that manages product management, but not any individual product. And so we've chosen that multi-product company, and we built an entire platform around it. And we built Stride was the first thing we've built on that platform. But the issue with that was that even though we thought it was a better product, by the time we'd got it out, that there was mind share elsewhere, and in many cases an ecosystem and things that are hard to beat. So we thought, instead of doing that, let's team up with Slack instead, and so we're working together with them on building out great integrations with their products, and we do what we do really well, and they do what they do well. Sure.
You got a bit of a stake in Slack in return, so you probably will make some money off.
Yeah, I mean, we got a chance to invest in Slack as a result of this partnership.
Now, looking forward, what's next for Atlassian? Is it this move to the cloud that we're talking about earlier, where maybe you're giving up on your server products, or what's happening? What's next?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word giving up, but the market is moving towards cloud. We're seeing that more than ever before. So, and this is from us where we really have strengths in both sides. But on the thing we're seeing from a customer perspective is that the combination of IT and software. There was a movement a little while ago called Agile, where you took business analysts or product managers and engineers and put them together. Instead of throwing documentation over the wall when programmers doing it, you put them in the same room and they'd talk and things would get better. These days, until recently, it's been developers would produce binaries and throw them over the wall to an IT team who would then be responsible for deploying them. And we're finding, again, people saying, well, let's put that in the room, all those people in the same room to make that happen faster. So DevOps, or bringing together of IT and software, is a really huge movement we're seeing everywhere, and it's changing the way that code gets delivered and deployed and monitored and so forth. There's a lot of exciting things happening there. But we're getting a lot of feedback from our customers on, hey, you're amazing for software. We want you to make sure that you're also amazing for those people that traditionally deployed the software.
Sure. And they want to play golf with you. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.